In 1997, 18-year-old Kristen Modafferi walked out of a San Francisco mall and vanished. No bag, no camera, no trace. One suspect, zero evidence. She was never seen again. Where are you watching from? And what time is it? If it's late, good luck, because this case disappears as fast as the girl at its center. Let's go back to 1997. On June 23rd, 1997, 18-year-old Kristen Modafferi clocked out of her shift at Spinelli's coffee shop in the Crocker Galleria Mall in downtown San Francisco. She wore her work clothes, a teal shirt and khaki pants, and carried her backpack over one shoulder. The young woman had plans that afternoon, plans she had mentioned to her coworkers. But what those plans were exactly, nobody could say for certain. Kristen told a few people at work that she was going to take photographs somewhere after her shift ended. She loved photography. It was one of her passions. She had brought her camera with her that day, tucked safely inside her backpack. Some coworkers remembered her mentioning something about going to Land's End, a rugged coastal area on the northwestern edge of San Francisco. Others weren't so sure. The details were vague, scattered, incomplete. What is known for certain is that Kristen left the coffee shop at exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon. Security cameras captured her walking through the mall, moving with purpose, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step. She exited through the main doors and stepped out onto the busy streets of San Francisco. And then, as if she had walked through an invisible doorway into another dimension, Kristen Modafferi disappeared. She was supposed to call her parents that evening. She always called her parents. Kristen was responsible, organized, and deeply connected to her family back in North Carolina. When the phone didn't ring that night, her mother felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. By the next morning, when there was still no word from Kristen, her parents knew something was terribly wrong. Kristen had come to San Francisco that summer to attend a summer session at the University of California, Berkeley. She was a straight-A industrial design student at North Carolina State University, and she wanted to experience life on the West Coast. She wanted adventure, independence, a taste of something different. San Francisco in the summer of 1997 seemed like the perfect place for all of that. She found a place to stay with a woman named Jill Lampo, who ran a sort of boarding house in the Oakland neighborhood of Rockridge. Kristen rented a room on the second floor. The house was always busy, always filled with young people coming and going. Jill later described Kristen as quiet, polite, and always punctual with her rent. She kept to herself mostly, but she seemed happy. To help pay for her expenses, Kristen worked 2 jobs. In the mornings, she worked at the coffee shop in the Crocker Galleria. In the afternoons and evenings, she worked at Café Musée inside the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. She was constantly on the move, bouncing between Berkeley, Oakland, and San Francisco. Her schedule was exhausting, but Kristen never complained. She was driven, ambitious, and determined to make the most of her summer. But on that Monday in late June, Kristen never showed up for her evening shift at Café Musée. Her manager waited, confused, and concerned. Kristen had never missed a shift before. She had never even been late. When hours passed with no call, no explanation, the manager knew something was very wrong. The San Francisco Police Department launched an investigation almost immediately. Missing persons cases involving young women always carry a certain urgency, a certain dread. And when that young woman is responsible, predictable, and from out of town, the urgency intensifies. Detectives began piecing together Kristen's final known movements. They spoke with her coworkers at Spinelli's. They reviewed security footage from the Crocker Galleria. They interviewed Jill Lampo and the other people who lived in the boarding house. They talked to Kristen's friends from Berkeley, trying to build a complete picture of her life in California. What they found was a young woman who seemed to have no enemies, no dangerous habits, no reason to vanish. Kristen didn't use drugs. She didn't drink heavily. She wasn't involved in any risky relationships. She was, by all accounts, exactly what she appeared to be on the surface, a bright, hard-working college student exploring a new city. But then, investigators started uncovering strange details, small things that didn't quite fit, things that suggested Kristen's final day might have been more complicated than anyone initially realized. A witness came forward claiming to have seen Kristen at the Crocker Galleria later in the afternoon, well after her shift had ended. The witness said Kristen appeared to be with a blonde woman, someone around her own age. The two seemed to be talking, walking together through the mall. But who was this blonde woman? None of Kristen's known friends matched that description. Another witness reported seeing Kristen in the Sunset District of San Francisco that afternoon, miles away from where she was supposed to be. The Sunset District sits on the western edge of the city, closer to the Pacific Ocean, closer to Land's End. This sighting seemed to align with Kristen's plans to take photographs. But again, the witness mentioned that Kristen appeared to be with someone, though the details were frustratingly vague. Detectives also discovered something troubling in the classified ads section of a local newspaper. On June 23rd, the same day Kristen disappeared, an ad appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle. The ad was looking for female roommates for a house in the Oakland Hills. Investigators learned that Kristen had responded to this ad. She had called the number listed and expressed interest in viewing the room. The phone number in the ad belonged to a man named John Onuma. He was in his late 30s, lived in the Oakland Hills with his girlfriend, and had placed the ad on behalf of his girlfriend, who was supposedly looking for female roommates. Detectives found this arrangement odd from the start. Why would a man be handling the roommate search? Why was he the one answering the phone calls? When police interviewed John Onuma, his story seemed rehearsed, almost too smooth. He admitted that Kristen had called about the room. He said they had a brief conversation, but she never came to see the place. He claimed he never met her in person. His girlfriend backed up his story. She said she didn't remember much about the various women who had called about the room. Everything was vague, non-committal, carefully constructed. But detectives had a feeling. That instinct that comes from years of reading people, of sensing when a story doesn't quite add up. There was something about John Onuma that set off alarm bells. His demeanor was too controlled, too careful. He seemed more interested in managing the narrative than in helping find a missing girl. Investigators dug deeper into Onuma's background. What they found was disturbing. He had a history of placing deceptive classified ads. He had been accused multiple times of using ads to lure young women, though nothing had ever resulted in criminal charges. Some women reported feeling uncomfortable during interactions with him. Others said he had made inappropriate advances or asked invasive questions. One particularly chilling detail emerged during the investigation. In the months before Kristen disappeared, several young women reported strange encounters with a man who matched Onuma's description. The man would approach them in public places, usually claiming to be a photographer or a modeling scout. He would offer to take their pictures, promising opportunities, connections, exposure. Some women agreed, some didn't. But those who did often reported feeling uneasy during the photo sessions, as if something wasn't quite right. Could Kristen have encountered this man? Could someone have approached her while she was out taking photographs that afternoon? The possibility hung in the air like smoke. Impossible to grasp, but impossible to ignore. Detectives also learned about a woman named Mahina Zaltana, John Onuma's girlfriend at the time. She lived with him in the Oakland Hills house. When police interviewed her separately, her story began to crack. She seemed nervous, evasive, contradictory. At times, she supported Onuma's version of events. At other times, she seemed to be holding something back, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't. Years later, Mahina would make stunning claims. She would tell journalists that she believed Onuma was involved in Kristen's disappearance. She would say that his behavior in the days and weeks after Kristen vanished was strange, paranoid, obsessive. She claimed he made her lie to police, threatened her, controlled her. But by then, it was too late. The trail had gone cold, evidence had been lost, memories had faded. In the immediate aftermath of Kristen's disappearance, San Francisco police conducted massive searches. They combed through Land's End, the rugged coastal trails where Kristen had supposedly planned to take photographs. They searched parks, beaches, abandoned buildings. They dragged sections of the San Francisco Bay. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, volunteer teams. Nothing turned up. Kristen's family flew out from North Carolina and stayed in the Bay Area for weeks, desperately searching, posting flyers, pleading for information. Her mother appeared on television, her voice breaking as she begged for her daughter's safe return. Her father walked the streets of San Francisco day after day, showing Kristen's photograph to anyone who would look, asking if anyone had seen his little girl. The community responded with an outpouring of support. Thousands of flyers were distributed, reward money was offered. Psychics, private investigators, and amateur sleuths all weighed in with theories and tips. But despite all the effort, despite all the attention, Kristen remained missing. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to stall. There were no solid leads, no physical evidence, no body. Kristen had simply vanished into thin air in one of the most densely populated cities in America. It seemed impossible, and yet it had happened. Over the years, various theories emerged. Some investigators believed Kristen had been abducted by someone she encountered while taking photographs. Others thought she might have been the victim of a serial predator who had been operating in the Bay Area during that time. There were whispers about trafficking rings, cult activity, random violence, but the theory that gained the most traction among some investigators was the one that kept circling back to John Onuma. Despite having no physical evidence, despite Onuma's denials, the circumstantial connections were too numerous to ignore. The timing of the classified ad, his history of deceptive behavior with young women, his girlfriend's later accusations, the strange sightings of Kristen with unidentified people that day. In 2011, almost 15 years after Kristen disappeared, new potential evidence emerged. Cadaver dogs were brought to a property in the Potrero Hill neighborhood of San Francisco, a house where John Onuma had been living at the time of Kristen's disappearance. The dogs indicated the possible presence of human remains. Investigators were hopeful. They tore up sections of the basement, they analyzed soil samples, they searched with ground-penetrating radar, but once again, nothing definitive was found. No remains, no clothing, no evidence that could prove Kristen had ever been in that house. The search ended, and the case returned to its cold limbo. John Onuma has never been charged with any crime related to Kristen Modafferi's disappearance. He has maintained his innocence consistently over the years. Without a body, without physical evidence, without witnesses who can definitively place Kristen with Onuma, prosecutors have never been able to build a case. Kristen's family has never stopped searching. They established a foundation in her name. They've hired private investigators. They've pursued every lead, every tip, every possibility, no matter how remote. Her mother has said that she will search for her daughter until the day she dies, that she will never give up hope of finding answers. To this day, Kristen Modafferi's disappearance remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases in San Francisco history. Somewhere in that city, on that summer afternoon in 1997, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her stepped out onto the street and was swallowed by darkness. Her camera was never found. Her backpack was never recovered. No trace of her has ever been discovered. It's as if Kristen Modafferi simply ceased to exist the moment she walked out of that mall. But her family knows she existed. They remember her laugh, her dreams, her plans for the future. They remember the girl who called home every night without fail. And they remember that on June 23rd, 1997, that call never came. And somewhere, perhaps, someone knows exactly why. Never answer the knock after midnight. Wednesday started ordinary. I reheated pizza, answered 2 emails, and let a forgettable sitcom murmur while the radiator clicked. Tyler, my roommate, was on nights at Miami Valley Hospital, leaving me alone in our duplex on Linden Avenue, Dayton, Ohio. 2 bedrooms, a stubborn front door, a dead porch light. At 7 a.m., 3 knocks sounded at the door. Not frantic, not polite, 3 even raps, as if someone had practiced them. I muted the TV and held my breath. No one visits after midnight. I slid to the window and peeled 2 blinds. Street lamp glow pooled on the cracked sidewalk. The porch was a dark shape against darker yard. Nobody. 10 seconds later. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same weight. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye bent the world into a circle. A tall figure stood on the mat, with his head tipped down, the brim of a cap shadowing his face. Heavy coat, hands at his sides. He didn't move. Don't answer, I whispered to myself, to the house. The figure's head tilted just a few degrees, like he'd heard me through wood. He raised his right hand and set his palm flat to the door. The knob under my fingers went cold, as if metal remembered winter. I backed away until the couch found the back of my knees. My phone buzzed. Maya, friend from work, reliable insomniac, texted, "Up?" I typed fast, "Someone's at my door." 3 knocks. Creepy. Before I hit send, 3 more raps landed. Her reply came in seconds. "Do not open it." At 12:16, they stopped. I didn't move until 12:30. 33, when the same 3 raps came back, deeper, like the wood had learned. The second night, at the moment, the microwave blinked 12. 7. 3 knocks came. Same cadence. I sat on the rug and stared at the grain. At 12:33, the raps returned, harder, 3 beats into my spine. At 1:12, Maya called. "Don't open it," she said, before I said hello. "You texted that last night," I said. "How did you know?" "I had a dream," she said. Then softer, "I heard it too." "On my street?" "No. Outside my apartment." 3 knocks. She laughed once, hollow. I didn't answer either. Tyler got home near 8, exhausted. He listened, then shrugged like someone who believes in locks. "If it happens again, I'll open it," he said. "Either it's some idiot, or there's no one there and you can sleep." The third night, we waited together. At 12:07, the knocks came. 3 measured blows. Tyler grinned the tired grin that dares fear to do something. "This is dumb," he said, and reached for the deadbolt. "Don't," I started. He opened the door. No one stood there. Cold air slid in. Tyler stepped out, barefoot on concrete, and looked left, then right. "Hello?" he called. In the reflection of the dark window beside the door, I saw a second figure behind him, taller, shoulders too broad for the coat, face buried in shadow. It stood close, too close. My mouth wouldn't work. I tried to say his name. It came out like a cough. "What?" Tyler said, turning. The door swung shut hard enough to rattle the frame. I yanked it open. Tyler stood alone on the porch, blinking. "Wind?" he said, though there wasn't any. He stepped in and locked the deadbolt twice. That was weird. We didn't pretend it would go away after that. We gave notice in the morning. "You'll lose the deposit," the landlord warned. "Keep it," Tyler said. We moved fast, carrying boxes in daylight. I propped the door with a brick. Every time I crossed the threshold, my skin tightened, like a cold hand skimmed me. When I went back for the last box detergent, a candle, 3 mismatched mugs, the door eased toward its frame, as if the house wanted to close its own mouth. That night, we slept on Maya's floor, grateful for traffic and the train that screamed by at 2 a.m. I woke to 3 knocks somewhere in the building and lay staring up until the HVAC stirred the quiet. 2 weeks later, we signed a lease across town, 3rd floor of a brick building overlooking a parking lot that never emptied. The first night, a nature show whispered me toward sleep. At 12:07, 3 slow knocks arrived from the stairwell door at the end of our hall. Tyler sat up in the TV's blue light. We didn't speak. At 12:33, the raps came again, closer, maybe 2 apartments down. I stood at our door and set my ear against it. At 12:56, they landed 1 door away. Nothing the next night. Nothing for 4. A trap works because it waits. On the 6th night, the knocks returned at 12:07, this time on our door. Maya called while the 3rd rap was still echoing. "Don't answer," she said. "Promise me." People tell me versions of this at the pharmacy night nurses, an old guy from Huber Heights. Same story. "What is it?" I asked. "It's patient," she said. It asks politely. 3 more knocks came. I put my mouth near the seam and said, "Who is it?" My breath came back to me, damp. No answer. The peephole showed only distorted hallway. But in the reflection of our turned-off TV, a man's outline waited with his head bowed and one hand raised, as if he were about to knock again and again. We made rules because they felt like armor. Do not open after midnight. Do not speak twice. Do not stare into reflections. If you hear your name, do not answer. For a week, the rules held. The knocks came on schedule, faded by dawn, and we still went to work. We swapped notes like campers tracking a bear. Monday, 12:07 soft, 12:33 harder. Wednesday, 1:2 wrong time ignored. Thursday, whisper? Maybe. The first whisper came Friday. Tyler left for his shift. I sat in the kitchen, pretending the clock's click was normal. At 12:07, the knocks arrived. I ignored them. At 12:12, static gathered near the floor, as if the wind had learned a word. Nate. The way my mother says it when I'm in trouble. Nate. Open. I slid to the hall and pressed my palm to the wood. Cold radiated through it, basement cold. You have to leave, I said. 3 gentle taps answered. Footsteps didn't follow. The cold didn't warm. At 12:33, the knob turned a fraction and stopped, like a hand without weight had tried it. Somewhere past 50, a text from Maya buzzed. Stay away from the door. There was no way she could know. And yet she did. It escalated the way storms do, slowly and then all at once. 2 nights quiet. 1 night, the chain trembled. Then, a Sunday when the knocks started early, 11:59, like midnight, had shifted to meet it. We dragged a bookcase in front of the door and stacked it with dictionaries, cookbooks, a box of Tyler's Anatomy flashcards. At 12:33, the wood creaked under pressure. The books shivered. I felt the urge to say, just a second, the way you do to a polite stranger, and swallowed it. We tried sleeping in shifts. The knocks learned our schedule. They came when Tyler drifted, when my eyes burned, when the fridge sighed to a stop. Sometimes I woke to find the knob beaded with condensation, as if something colder than air had breathed there. Then they changed targets. At 12:07 on a Tuesday, the knock sounded on Mrs. Alvarez's door. She lives 2 units down. She bakes too many cookies and tries to give them all away. I opened our door an inch. Her light glowed under the threshold. I heard the deadbolt turn. Mrs. Alvarez, I said through the crack, don't open. The word don't echoed. She paused. The chain rattled. Who is it? She asked, soft and tired. Silence answered. Please, I said louder. Her light went out. The chain slid. A breath of air moved toward us, colder than winter air. I saw the thin slice of her nightgown, the softer slice of hallway beyond, and the absence standing between them like a person. I shut our door, pressed my back to it, and counted until numbers made sense. Morning found her smiling with coffee and cookie halves. Bad dreams, she said. On the back of her right hand was a faint red mark shaped like someone else's fingers. We bought her a second deadbolt. We taped a sign on our door, do not answer after midnight. The manager laughed until he realized we weren't joking. We were not brave, just patient. The thing kept knocking, sometimes for us, sometimes for other people. Sometimes we heard a yes in the middle of the night, a chain slide, a soft opening, and long silence afterward. Next day, the hallway would smell like rain. It's after midnight, the city is a tired breath, Tyler is at work, the couch still holds the shape of him, the refrigerator ticks like a countdown. At 12:07, 3 knocks arrive, exactly on time. I do not move. In the black glass of the TV, I catch the suggestion of a figure on the other side, taller than the frame by an inch, head bowed as if listening to the spot where I'm standing. There is a pause long enough to think it's over. Then 3 more, patient as rain. If you want an ending, all I can give is this. The rule has never failed me. Never answer the knock after midnight. If you hear your name, do not answer. If you see a figure only in a dark reflection, especially then, do not answer. Because whatever learned the exact weight of those 3 raps has time. It will memorize your schedule. It will wait on new porches under new broken lights until you forget why you left the television on and why you taped a note to your own door. And one night, when you are very tired, and the apartment is very quiet, and the clock is the only thing ticking, you will touch the knob and feel the cold on the other side feel you That is not the moment to be brave. That is the moment to back away and breathe and let it pass like weather. Open nothing, answer nothing. Wait until the first pale stripe of morning answers for you. Then make coffee. Text someone you trust. Say you didn't answer. Call it a win, even if it doesn't feel like one. And when you hear 3 soft raps the next night and the next, remember what the old stories keep saying in a dozen towns, under a dozen names. The thing at the door is polite and patient, and it is looking for the first person who forgets that politeness is not the same thing as safety. Never answer the knock after midnight. The stranger who lives behind the mirror. The first time I noticed him was a Tuesday night after a late shift, when the apartment was so quiet I could hear the old refrigerator tick in and out. I rent the third floor of a converted Victorian in Columbus, Ohioathan walls, high ceilings, radiators that breathe like a sleeping animal. The place came with a bathroom mirror the size of a window, framed in flaking gold paint. The landlord swore it was the original, NEY, which is landlord for I don't ask me to replace it. Steam rolled up from the shower and ghosted the glass. I swiped a clear oval with my palm and leaned close, checking a shaving nick on my cheek. That's when it happened, auberly there, but real enough to bruise the mind. My reflection lagged. I tilted my head, he tilted a beat later. I raised my hand, his hand caught up like a bad video call. Sleep, I told myself. You need sleep. Sleep. I laughed out loud just to hear a human voice, but when I turned toward the door, I saw, in the mirror, a dark figure glide through the hallway behind me. I spun around nothing. Rug, lamp, an empty stretch of floorboards. In the mirror, the hallway caught up. Late. I slept anyway, because rent is real and panic isn't. The next 2 days were normal enough to sand the edge off it. Then Thursday at 2:14 a.m., while I brushed my teeth, the bathroom door drifted open an inch on its own. The air changed cooler, heavier, like a storm front squeezing into a room. In the mirror, the door was already open 2 inches, and someone stood in the gap. I stopped breathing. I turned to look. My hallway was empty. In the mirror, a tall shape leaned into the doorway, just a man's outline at first, then more. Shoulders set too far back, head cocked the way you'd tilt yours if you were listening through a wall. He didn't move. He watched. Foam clawed down my chin. I spat into the sink and faced forward again. The glass had fogged, and a handprint pressed out from the other side along fingers, too long. The print faded without smearing, as if the heat itself exhaled it. I slept with the bathroom light on. Every time I opened my eyes, I expected to see a silhouette standing in that yellow rectangle. At 3, the light flicked off, and then on. I waited for footsteps that never came. I told myself it was the bulb. The next day, I bought a new one at the hardware store off Parsons Avenue. The cashier Lorno asked about the cold and the game and recommended a brand like she was saving my life. I almost said, I think there's someone living behind my mirror. I said, thanks, and went home. Friday brought something worse. The mirror stopped copying my hallway. In the reflection, the runner rug disappeared. A picture frame I didn't own hung on a nail I'd never seen. My lamp had a different shade. I stared at that wrong hallway and fought the feeling that someone else was staring back through a different house entirely. I propped my phone against the mouthwash bottle and set it to record. I crawled into bed with the bathroom door cracked just enough to slice a gold line into the dark. This building has its own midnight. Pipes tick. Floorboards settle. People on the stairs don't sound like people. At 2:33 a.m., I heard it. A slow scratch along the gilt frame like a fingertip walking the gold leaf. Then again from inside. In the morning, shaking, I played the footage. At 2:33, the reflected hallway dimmed. A figure stepped into the frame from the left and stopped inches from the glass. Even in compression, I could see the tilt of his head, the wrong geometry of his shoulders. He raised his hand. When his palm met the inside of the mirror, a fresh handprint bloomed in my bathroom on the outside. My side. I sent the clip to Maya, who works the overnight pharmacy window and answers my texts even when I don't deserve it. She called immediately. I hate this. She said. Come over after my shift. I told myself I wouldn't look at the mirror again. I looked. I breathed on the glass. Fog spread, and letters wrote themselves backward. HELP. They wavered like they'd been scrawled with a shaking finger, then thinned and vanished. Who are you? I asked the empty room. My voice sounded like a stranger trying on my mouth. That night, I dragged my dresser across the hall and wedged it in front of the mirror. A sliver still showed along the edge of a slice of my face as I passed. At 2:20 a.m., the dresser scraped an inch over tile with no hands on it. I sat up so fast, I felt my ribs. The dresser moved again, steady, patient, as if something on the other side were bracing a shoulder and pushing. It settled canted, revealing a handy's width of glass. The mirror looked deep, deeper than mirrors look. I said, I stop, because people say things to pretend they have a say. From behind the glass, 3 slow knocks answered oppolite, like a guest, like someone who knows you're home. At 8, I called my landlord. Mr. Donnelly, your retired firefighter, massive forearms, laughed like a barco showed up with a drill and blue painter's tape. He tipped the big mirror forward a hair to check the anchors, and for a breath, I saw a thin black seam open between wall and glass. Cold air poured out. He didn't flinch. He drilled, sank longer screws. "He's solid," he said. I asked if anyone had ever died in the building. He grinned. "It is 100-something years old," he said. "Everybody's died in it." That afternoon gave me back my nerve. Sunset took it away. Shadows sat heavier in corners, like they'd been practicing while I was gone. I set a hammer on the coffee table, a flashlight, a note that said, "Call Maya if anything happens." At 2:29 a.m., the house went too quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. Breath moved under the bathroom door, lifting the edge of the bath mat. Settling. Lifting. I stood in the doorway, with the hammer dangling uselessly. He was waiting inches beyond the glass, closer than before. The outline had acquired details: eyes, mouth, a small white line under the chin that matched the scar I'd had since I fell off a bike in 6th grade. His nose had the slight bend left over from a college fight I didn't win. He was me, wearing me like a suit borrowed from a friend. Only the smile was wrong, too patient, too practiced, like he'd had time to rehearse. "What do you want?" I asked. His lips moved a heartbeat later. He raised his hand, palm to the glass. I stared at the matching creases, the twin half-moon scar at the base of the thumb. He wrote, one finger trailing a line in fog I hadn't made, "Your side is warm." I swung the hammer. The mirror didn't break. The shock ran up my arm and rattled my teeth. In the reflection, the sound came late, lower, echoing like it had farther to travel. He leaned, listening to something I couldn't hear, then slid his hand forward again and pressed into the glass. Not on toe-and-toe it, like the surface was water just starting to freeze. His knuckles vanished to the first joints. I shoved the dresser back with my shoulder, pinning the mirror to the wall. Wood vibrated under my palms. Knuckles wrapped from the other side, soft, then harder, then soft again, like someone testing a door. At dawn, I called Maya and told her everything, even the part where his smile didn't fit my face. She didn't say I was crazy. "You're not staying there tonight," she said. "Pack a bag." I did. At a motel off I-71, the manager gave me an end-of-hall room and a key card that worked on the second try. The room smelled like cleaner and coffee. I checked the mirror above the sink 3 times. It showed me when I moved. It didn't think about it first. I slept with the TV on low and the bathroom light off, as if the dark were safer when I could see it. In the morning, I went back, planning to rip the mirror off the wall and dump it behind the strip malls past the freeway. When I opened my apartment door, the place smelled faintly like rain, though the sky was bright. Everything felt nudged a half-inch to the left. The bathroom light glowed. The dresser still pressed the mirror. The trash bag I hadn't taped yet lay folded on the sink like a joke. My phone chimed in my pocket. Except my phone was charging at the motel. The sound came again, not a chime now, but 3 soft knuckles on wood. From the hall closet, the knob turned a fraction. A whisper slid under the door. "Enate. My name," in my voice. Half a second late. I backed away and didn't stop until I reached the sidewalk. I sat in my car with the engine off and watched my own windows until the breath fogged the windshield. Then I drove back to the motel and stared into the cheap mirror like it owed me something. Maya arrived with a small duffel and 2 coffees. We went to the precinct. Officer Ramirez took my statement with a calm face that told me she'd heard worse. She didn't write emirari anywhere I could see. She and her partner followed us to the apartment for a welfare check. They cleared rooms like they were filming a procedure video, then came back to the hall. "You want this moved?" Ramirez asked, eyeing the dresser. "Yeah," I said, and braced for whatever would break. She slid the dresser aside. The mirror looked back with bored glass. I hated it in a way that felt like grief. "I call us if anything else happens," she said. After they left, the apartment felt like a kid with a secret, waiting for the parents to drive away. It waited. Waiting is worse. By late afternoon, I was too tired to be scared properly. I layered 6 black trash bags over the mirror and sealed the edges with duct tape, then ratchet-strapped the dresser to the sink to hold it all flat. Maya watched me work like she wasn't going to talk me out of it. "You know this is theater." "Ish," she said. "It won't stop the thing that wants you." "I know," I said. "I just need a night." We set alarms for midnight. 1, 2, 3. We brewed coffee that tasted like metal. At 12, 0, nothing. At 1, 0, the pipes groaned somewhere far away. At 2, 0, a draft lifted the corner of the Plastico Impossible, given the tape and the strap and common sense. At 2:33, the ratchet clicked one tooth. Then another, as if something on the other side were leaning and smiling and couldn't believe how easy it was. The duct tape wrinkled at the top left. The bag bulged, a slow tide. From behind the plastic, through inches of glass and whatever sits between, a whisper braided itself out of 2 voices mine and something thinner. Innate. Open. We stood in the hall like people in a painting. The bulge eased back, the strap eased, the apartment exhaled. Maya said, almost to herself, I don't think it wants out. I think it wants you to step in." We left before sunrise. I checked out of the motel and moved to a different one 2 towns away, a place where the ice machine roars all night and the clerk calls everyone boss. I keep the bathroom door open and the light off, because that's the version where I can see what I'm afraid of. Most nights, my reflection meets me where I am, when I am. Most nights. Yesterday, steam from the shower clouded the little mirror, and a palm print appeared from the far side Omin down to the crescent scar by the thumb. I wiped it. It came back late. Mr. Donnelly leaves me voicemails that start kind and end annoyed. "Rentis not optional," he reminds me. He doesn't know what lives in my wall. I drive past sometimes at night. The bathroom window glows like an eye that forgot to blink. If I look too long, I start to feel like I'm the one behind the glass, watching the man who used to live my life walk past without seeing me. If there's a reason I'm telling you this, it's not to argue with your sense of what's possible. It's a warning. If your mirror lags even once, if your hand raises and your reflection takes its time catching up, if the glass fogs and words you didn't write breathe there, don't lean closer. Don't test it. Don't whisper back. And if something knocks from the closet with the soft patience of a guest who knows your schedule, Odo, not answer, because the stranger who lives behind the mirror isn't trying to visit. He's practicing. He's studying how you stand when you brush your teeth, and the exact weight of your sigh when you can't sleep, and the way your mouth shapes your own name. He's memorizing the part where he says, in your voice, that everything is fine. One night, in a quiet room far from home, your bathroom light will flicker twice, then steady. You'll see a smear on the corner of the mirror. You can't polish away a small arc, like the top of a grin. You'll tell yourself it was always there. You'll turn off the light and step into the dark hall, and for a breath, in the mirror that isn't a mirror, the hallway will stay bright after the switch clicks. Bright enough to show you a figure in the doorway who doesn't move when you do. That's when he's closest. That's when he's almost you. That's when you should walk away eyes front, breath steady, heartbeat loud enough to drown him out. Because if you look back, if you meet your own gaze and your reflection smiles a fraction late, he'll know. He'll know you're listening. He'll know the door is open. And once that door opens, it doesn't close. Not on this side. Not on his. Not anymore. The shadow that waits beside the bed, The first night it happened was a wet Sunday in Portland, Maine, the kind that makes the streets shine like black glass. I live above a bakery on Congress Street. During the day, the place smells like cinnamon and yeast, and after midnight, it smells like damp wood and old paint. The radiators knock inside the walls like a heartbeat, trying to keep time. I'd fallen asleep with a true crime documentary whispering from my laptop, and at 2:17 a.m., I jolted awake with the unshakable sensation that someone was standing right next to my bed. I stayed still. That's how you test reality at night. You measure your breath, check the weight of your limbs, count the sounds that mean the building is still a building. The red digits of the clock glowed against the wall. A street lamp outside was throwing a gray wash through the curtain. I could make out the dresser, the laundry I kept promising I'd fold, the chair angled toward the window, and, beside the bed, a shape darker than the rest of the dark, exactly where a person would stand if they wanted to watch you sleep. I reached for the lamp, knocked over my water glass, and swore under my breath as cold soaked my wrist. The shock woke me all the way up. The lamp snapped on. Yellow light crawled across the floorboards. The spot next to the bed was empty. Just rug, just wood, the chair, the ordinary. My heart kept acting like it had a reason not to slow down. I told myself the thing everyone tells themselves: sleep paralysis, too much caffeine, a trick of light, and left the lamp on until morning. Monday pretended none of it mattered. I cut through Monument Square to catch the bus to the office, bought a coffee from a window where the barista calls everyone babe, and told my coworker Kelsey I slept fine even though I looked like a person who lost an argument with a knight. Our office used to be a shoe factory. Now it's exposed brick and whiteboards and meetings that start at 9, whether you're ready or not. Kelsey slid me mint gum and said it tricks your brain into thinking you've slept. I chewed 2 pieces and lied to my brain all day. That night, I did normal on purpose. Cleaned the sink, answered 2 emails, took a too hot shower so the mirror fogged and I could write a stupid smiley face on it like I was 8. I set the laptop on the chair and promised myself I'd keep the overhead light on, then turned it off anyway, because you don't realize how much you need darkness until you try to ban it. The radiator clicked like a metronome. Somewhere below me, a timer chimed in the bakery, and someone laughed. I fell asleep to the ordinary soundtrack of other people being awake. At 2:17, I woke the way you surface from deep water, sudden, disoriented, sure that someone is watching. The air in the room felt different, thicker. I kept my eyes slitted, like I could control what came next if I just pretended well enough. The shadow stood at the edge of the mattress, taller than me. Shoulders sloped at an angle that made my nerves want to leave my body. It didn't breathe, it didn't sway. It was a piece of the room missing light. "Hey," I said to the dark, before I knew I was going to speak. No voice answered, but the corner of the blanket by my feet dipped, a small settling, like the weight of one resting knuckle. I snapped my phone's flashlight on and flooded the place with hard white. The spot beside the bed was empty. The dip smoothed itself away as if fabric could unremember pressure. I didn't sleep again. At 6, I walked in a circle around the block twice and bought coffee I didn't need. When the bakery opened, I bought a bagel and stared out the window until the glass fogged and cleared and fogged again. Wednesday, I searched things you shouldn't search at work. Why do I wake at the same time? Why do I see someone in my room? Why does the mattress feel like someone is sitting on it? The answers were unkind. Anxiety? Yes. Sleep paralysis? Yes. Old buildings with personalities? Yes. I found a forum thread where someone wrote the exact time I was waking too, 17, and said they felt watched. The top reply: do not speak to it. Do not look into the place where its face should be. Do not feed it attention. It feeds on your attention. Thursday, I tried science. I sprinkled a thin veil of flour on the floor beside the bed, like a first snow. I set my phone on the dresser, camera aimed at the place where a person would stand if they were waiting for you to look. I placed a mug of water on the nightstand to catch any breath that might fog it. Then I lay down and waited to see if the dark had rules. At 2:17, something colder than the room arrived first, like the way rain warns you before it taps the window. The pressure in the air changed an elevator, stopping one floor too soon. The shape took up space at the edge of the mattress. I stared at the ceiling and told myself, Don't look, don't look, and then looked. The blanket dipped again, a thumbprint's worth. The phone screen lit itself as if curious, and then the power went out. The building exhaled into silence. The radiator held its breath. Below me, a tray clattered to tile, and someone swore. In that total black, the mattress gave 2 inches by my knee, the way a bed agrees with a person who sits down. I kept my eyes open because closing them felt like saying yes to something. A whisper threaded the air. It didn't sound like a throat. It sounded like the room learning to speak all at once. And yet I heard my name. Noah. The syllables were soft and late, like they had to drag themselves to me. I fumbled for a lamp that wouldn't work. Minutes or hours later, the power returned with a hum that felt like the world turning back on. Yellow light filled the corner. The flower was undisturbed. The mug showed clear glass. The video was hours of nothing, then static, then one warped frame right where the mattress edge met the dark like heat above asphalt. I watched that frame until the phone got hot in my hand. Friday, I told Kelsey everything, because if you don't let a truth out, it makes its own door. She listened the way good people do face, careful, mouth pressed, eyes telling me she believed the part about being afraid, even if she couldn't believe the rest. My cousin had something, she said finally. He said if he acknowledged it, it got closer. Don't give it anything, not even your fear. What does that even look like? I asked. Pretend you're boring, she said, which might be the hardest thing you've ever done. That night, I tried boring like it could be armor. No screens after 11, lights off on purpose, phone charging across the room where I'd have to stand to touch it. I lay on my side and matched my breath to the radiator's rhythm. In, out, like training a skittish animal. I woke at 2:17 because my bones had learned the hour. The dark rearranged itself into an absence by the bed. I didn't look. I didn't speak. The mattress didn't dip. The shadow waited a long time, then slid away like a hand leaving water. Sunlight came. I made coffee and pretended I'd won something. Saturday I cleaned, laundered sheets, vacuumed flour from under the bed, and found 3 socks that didn't match any of the others. FaceTimed my sister Jenna while she stirred chili in a big pot and her kid waved a wooden spoon like a flag. I almost said, I'm being haunted, but saying it out loud felt like giving someone a key. I said, I'm tired, and the city smells like rain, and that was close enough to true. Kelsey made me sleep at her place that night, studio near the water, 3 plants that resent her, a cat named Buster that resents everyone. We put on a dumb movie and pretended to watch it. At 2:17, the lamp in the corner flickered once, twice. We both watched the lamp like it was a person entering the room. Probably the wiring, she said. Probably, I said. At 2:34, the air got heavier the way it does before a storm, and I knew before I turned my head that it had found me anyway. The shadow stood beside the bed. Kelsey's bed tonight. Not mine, darker than the dark. Buster stared into the place where it wasn't and made a low sound I'd never heard in a cat's throat. The mattress dipped a fraction near my hip. No, I whispered, not a command, just a boundary, said out loud. The outline sharpened for a moment, then blurred, like fog walking through fog. It didn't leave, but it didn't lean. The room held steady until morning. Sunday, I booked a sleep study at a clinic by Back Cove just to have a different night watched by a different machine. Dr. Patel asked about stress and screens and caffeine. She wrote notes like the ocean collects stones. When I said 2:17, one of her eyebrows lifted by a millimeter. REM disturbances can cause vivid experiences, figures, pressure, voices, she said gently. The more attention you give them, the more you teach your brain to perform them. That doesn't make them feel any less real. She printed out a list. No caffeine after noon, no screens after 11, breathe slowly if you wake, get out of bed if you can't stop thinking. In the lab, wires stuck to my scalp, camera blinking in the corner. I still woke at the minute my body knows. The sterile room smelled like soap. The shadow gathered at the bedside as if it belonged to the equipment more than to me. There was no whisper, only the sensation of something deciding whether to sit. The report the next morning said sleep fragmentation and arousal events and subjective perception of presence. It did not say there isn't a shadow. It did not say there is. I moved apartments anyway. You can agree with science and still pack boxes as if the walls have ears. I took a third-floor walk-up near Deering Oaks, where pigeons sound like children practicing words. The first night I arranged the bed so both sides had space, as if politeness might help. I put a pair of shoes by the door with the toes almost touching, a tiny trap that would tell me if something stepped between them. I slept like a person who has a job in the morning. At 2:17, the city held its breath. The shadow stood in its place. I counted the ceiling fan's blades, named the objects I could see without moving my eyes lamp, crack in paint, the corner where dust likes to gather. A draft moved along my wrist hairs. The mattress gave with a whisper. "Make room," it said. "Not tonight," I answered, and for the first time, my voice didn't shake. The pressure eased, polite and patient, like someone standing up from a bed they've tried and decided not to buy. Days stretched, nights folded. On Tuesday, I found the rug next to the bed rucked up like a foot had dragged it. On Thursday, there were 3 smudges on the baseboard near the nightstand, finger-shaped and too high for a hand that belonged to someone sitting, too low for someone standing. Saturday at noon, I dozed and woke with the weight of someone leaning over me and the smell of wet concrete in the room even though the day was bright. I made rules like a sailor makes a chart. No caffeine after noon, no screens after 11. If I wake, breathe in 4s and out in 6s. If it speaks, do not answer. If I mess up and look into the blank place where its face should be, think of boring things. Grocery lists, the squeak in the left cabinet hinge, the bakery's first tray hitting the counter downstairs. Boredom is a door that shuts itself. It adapted. It always does. One night, the whisper wasn't my name. It was a question, "Are you awake?" said like the house itself had learned language. Another night, it skipped me entirely and stood, I think, on the far side of the bed, as if testing whether I would turn toward it. I didn't. I watched the ceiling fan and counted to a number I'd never used for counting before. When I reached it, the room warmed by a breath. Across the hall, a new neighbor moved in, Mrs. Alvarez, who brings too many cookies to people who don't deserve them. At 2:17 one Tuesday, 3 soft taps came from her side of the hallway. I opened my door an inch and called, "Don't open." The chain on her door slid once, twice, then stopped. In the strip of light near her threshold, I saw the air go darker, like a person had decided to be there. "Please," I said, louder. After a long moment, her light clicked off. Morning found 3 faint ovals on the back of her hand, like a grip that had faded. "Bad dream," she said, smiling too much. I bought her a second deadbolt anyway. I tried to be brave once and set a camera again, this time a cheap trail cam pointed at the side of the bed. It took exactly 1 photo all night. A black frame with a brighter black curve. Like a shoulder. Where a shoulder would be. I deleted it. Sometimes proof is a greedy thing. It eats more than it feeds. Last week, I got sick fever, chills, the kind of cold that gives you dreams about drowning in shallow water. That night, the time came and went, and nothing stood by the bed. The emptiness scared me more than the presence. It meant it could leave. It also meant it could choose. Tonight, rain rolled in from the bay and traded the street's dust for the smell of salt. I fell asleep to Waterbead and run along the sash. At 2:17, the room thickened. The shadow took its place beside the bed, the way the sea takes its line against shore. I kept my eyes on the ceiling, named what I could name, fan, crack, red digits, my own hand under the blanket. The mattress didn't dip. The whisper didn't come. It simply existed, and so did I. When the first blue leaked around the curtain and the bakery timer chimed below, the pressure eased. I stood up, my feet were cold against the floorboards. I made coffee and texted Kelsey a photo of the morning light on the rug, because sometimes you have to prove to someone that morning is real. If you wake and feel watched, if the room changes weight at the same minute every night, if the dark arranges itself into a figure that waits with the patience of rain, don't give it what it wants. Don't whisper back. Don't stare into the place where a face should be. Don't make a ritual out of surviving it. Count. Breathe. Think of groceries. Think of the tiny screw you keep meaning to tighten. Think of cinnamon and ovens coming to temperature and the street waking up like nothing happened. And if the blanket tugs, if the mattress grants an inch, if the air near your cheek learns your name and says it late Noah, are you awake? Make the answer somewhere quiet inside your ribs, not in the open air. Make it small. Make it forgettable. If you must speak at all, use the only words that have ever worked for me and say them the way you'd talk to an empty room, not because you're alone, but because you intend to be. Not tonight. Not tonight. Not ever. She heard breathing, but she was alone. Emily didn't hate the farmhouse. She hated what night did to it. By daylight, the place on the edge of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, looked almost kind white siding faded to cream, a porch that sagged like an old smile, lace curtains that turned the sun into soft squares on the floor. After dark, the woods crowded closer. The wind came off the fields and pressed against the windows. The house sounded bigger than it had any right to be. She arrived on a Thursday with a suitcase, a laptop, and Cooper, the golden retriever, who'd never met a thunderstorm he couldn't nap through. Her mother had asked her to stay a week, meet a contractor, and make sure the pipes wouldn't freeze. Everyone else in the family had suddenly remembered plans. Emily said yes because she was tired of saying no. She pulled up at dusk, gravel chattering under her tires, and sat for a minute with the engine off. That particular rural quiet slid in no neighbor televisions, no buses, just the high electric hum of insects and the distant rush of the highway like the ocean you can't see. The porch light buzzed and didn't turn on. Cooper jumped out and skittered on the kitchen linoleum, then came back to lean his warm weight against her shin like a promise. Inside, dust held the afternoon light in place. The stairs answered each step like a question. Emily went room to room and made the house honest. Lamps on, curtains open, faucets run until the water stopped smelling like metal. Upstairs, the guest room faced the tree line. She made the bed, set Cooper's cushion by the door, and texted her brother, "Here. Yes, it's weird. No, I'm not scared." The first night, she woke at 1:42 a.m. to breathing. That wasn't hers. At first, she thought it was the radiator coming alive in a new way. Then she felt it. A cool draft moving at the exact pace of an inhale. A faint scrape on the exhale like paper dragged over wood. The sound was close. Not from the hall, not from the window, right beside the bed. She kept her eyes closed and tested the world the way you do when you're deciding whether fear is useful. Hand, lamp, voice. She found her voice last. Hello? It came out too small and sounded like it might break. The breathing stopped. Cooper raised his head and stared into the corner near the dresser. Ears pricked, body tense, no growl. Emily slid her hand until her fingers found her phone, thumbed the flashlight, and hit the switch on the lamp. Yellow spilled across wood. The corner was empty. Cooper lowered his head, but not all the way. Emily said out loud, just to hear a human voice, "You're overtired," and didn't sleep again. Morning reshaped everything. She made coffee on the old stove and watched the steam braid itself upward into the draft from the window over the sink. The contractor came late and left early, speaking fluent shrug about insulation and copper lines. Emily drove into town for batteries she didn't need and a cinnamon roll she did. The clerk asked if she was visiting family. Sort of, she said, which was close enough to true. The second night, she left the lamp on. She lay on her side, scrolling until the phone slipped onto the quilt. She must have drifted because when she opened her eyes, the clock said 2:07. The house had that past midnight wait again. She felt the breathing before she heard it air cooling the fine hair along her cheek, a rhythm that didn't belong to her chest. Inhale, exhale. Careful, deliberate, almost polite. She turned her head millimeter by millimeter. In the lamplight, the room made its shapes. Chair, dresser, the slope of Cooper sleeping. Between the nightstand and the bed, a darkness darker than the dark. The suggestion of a shoulder, the tilt of a head studying her like she was a photograph it was trying to understand. Cooper was on his feet before she saw him move. He barked once, then backed into the corner and sat as if his legs had forgotten how to stand. Emily's hand found the lamp switch. The light flared and the shadow melted. The house exhaled. She sat up and stayed that way until the light through the curtain went thin and gray and she could call the night done. She told herself stories at breakfast. Old houses breathe, pipes complain. You can hear your own pulse and mistake it for footsteps all the time. She wished any of it felt like enough. The third night, it got worse, because of course it did. She made choices that felt like armor. Lights on in the hall, music low in the kitchen, shoes by the door pointing outward. She drank coffee at 10, regretted it at midnight, and decided regret was preferable to fear. At 2:14, the power went out. Everything stopped at once. The refrigerator's soft rumble, the heater's thin whine, the lamplight and darkness arrived with the weight of a body. Emily sat up with a sound trapped between throat and teeth. Cooper whined, a small, high note of animal panic she'd never heard from him. The breathing returned, not from one place this time, from everywhere. It rose from the corner and the closet and the space by her ear. In, out, a dozen lungs, all reaching the same patience. She fumbled her phone and lit the screen. The blue light made everything look like a hospital. She swung the beam toward the door and saw, for the length of a blink, a tall shape with shoulders drawn up and a head bent as if pressing its ear to the quiet. The light hit wood, and there was nothing to see. The house held the dark another 19 minutes. She counted every one. At 2:33, the light snapped back in a stutter. Emily cried soundlessly into her hands. She'd never been the person who cried at nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. She called her brother after 9. "Can you come out tonight?" she asked, and listened to him search for an answer that wasn't no. "It's just that house," he said finally. "You're probably wound up. Try the radio. People swear by it." "People swear by a lot of things," she almost said. Instead, she said, "Okay," and bought more batteries in town just to put her hands on normal things. By the fourth night, Cooper refused the stairs. He lay at the bottom and watched the first step with his ears pinned like the step had done something unspeakable. Emily gave up and dragged his cushion to the landing, curled on the floor with a blanket, and pretended sleeping halfway to the bedroom counted as bravery. At 2:17, she woke to breathing on the stairs. It didn't climb like a person. It arrived. A careful inhale coming from the step below, then the one below that. The runner vibrated under her palm. She saw nothing, but the air told the truth in the way it moved. "Not tonight," she whispered, borrowing something she'd seen online about boundaries and telling herself you get to have them. The breathing paused. Then, for the first time, it carried a word. Stay. The syllable wasn't made with a mouth. It rode the exhale like a leaf on a river. Emily pressed both hands over her ears as if she could keep the sound from reaching the parts of her brain where belief lives. Cooper finally barked raw, scared like he'd broken a long vow, and the breathing slid away as if embarrassed at being heard. The next day, she explored because fear makes you tidy and then curious. In the hall closet, she found a shoebox with her grandmother's handwriting on the lid. Inside, postcards, a fan that smelled faintly of lavender, a stack of recipe cards, a folded note she unfolded twice before she could make herself read it. Winter nights are long here. Make friends with them, or they make themselves. Emily put the note back in the box, set the box back on the shelf, and stood very still until she could move without shaking. She almost left then. She even put her suitcase by the door. The keys were gone. She was sure she had left them in the blue ceramic bowl by the sink because that was where she always left them, and the bowl sat there looking innocent and blue and empty. She checked the counter, under the mail, the pockets of yesterday's jeans, the driveway. She found gum, a penny, a paperclip, 3 pine needles, and no keys. "You can't keep me," she said to a house, "because fear makes you ridiculous too." She called Maya. Everyone should have a friend like Maya. Someone who answers at any hour with, "Tell me where you are. Say it slowly." When Emily did, Maya said, "Get a motel. I'll call you at midnight. If you're not out by then, I'm calling the sheriff." Emily said she would. She meant it. She also meant to keep breathing, and look how that went. That night, she didn't go upstairs. She set the radio to a station that played songs old enough to know where they belonged, turned every light on, and sat on the couch with a knife on the table like a movie about bad ideas. Cooper pressed his length along her legs. Midnight slid past. 1, 2. She began to believe routine could outweigh whatever had learned her name. At 2:17, the radio went to static, and the room learned to breathe again. This time, it came right to her ear. A cool inhale lifted a little hair from her cheek, and she watched it happen in the black mirror of the TV, her face pale and unlovely and very alive, and behind it, the suggestion of another shape leaning in. The exhale brushed her skin. It smelled like a basement that had never quite dried. Still awake. The words arrived inside the breath. Not loud, certain. The knife made a small sound hitting the floor. Emily stood and found she had to learn her legs all over again. Keys, bag, leash, the choreography of leaving. She didn't turn anything off, and she didn't lock the door. Gravel bit her feet like the world apologizing. She drove to the motel off Route 30 with the giant fiberglass cow in the field and the desk clerk who didn't ask why her hands shook. She slept with the TV, muttering, and the bathroom light off. She woke at 2:17 out of habit. The air conditioner hummed. The ice machine down the hall knocked itself empty. No breathing. She cried then, because relief is a kind of flood, and people cry in floods. In the morning, her brother called from the farmhouse. "You left all the lights on," he said, trying to make it a joke and failing. "Your keys were on the counter, and, there's this fan. Did you put it out?" "No," she said. The word didn't feel like it belonged to her voice. He made a sound like he was putting a glass down very carefully. "Okay, I'll lock up." That should have been the end. The family hired a property manager who said things like great bones and fantastic potential and sent photos of the basement after he replaced a section of pipe. The concrete looked damp. At the bottom of the stairs, 5 oval smudges made a shape Emily couldn't stop seeing as a hand that had rested there and then changed its mind. She went back once because the mind is an unhelpful organ. She told herself it was just to pick up what she'd left: her book, her jacket, the little recipe box, so the lavender fan could stay with the person who had liked its smell. The house let her in like nothing had happened. Afternoon, wind chime, sun falling through lace. She moved room to room on a route that kept her from ever standing with her back to a doorway. In the bedroom, she opened the curtains and let the woods be the woods. "I'm going now," she said to no one, and meant it like a prayer. Night has long fingers. 2 weeks later, in her apartment in the city, she woke at 2:17 because that was who she was now. The streetlight laid an orange square on the wall. Her neighbor's footsteps went above, ordinary as weather. She almost smiled because ordinary is not nothing. Then she heard it, faint, patient. The inhale of a breath that wasn't hers, arriving from the thin seam under her bedroom door, as if absence can learn how to cross a threshold once it knows your name. She sat up too fast, and the world tilted. The breathing stopped. The radiator hissed. A siren went by 3 streets over, far enough to be a lullaby. She lay back down and told herself, the thing you say when there's nothing else to say. No. She said it again, in her chest this time instead of her mouth. No. It didn't come back that night. She changed how she lived anyway. No caffeine afternoon, no screens in bed. If she woke at the bad time, she named the ordinary things out loud: lamp, book, window, socks, to remind the room of what belonged in it. She did not listen for voices. She did not lean toward the quiet to catch a word that might be there. She let the quiet pass like weather and met morning as if it had done her a favor. People in town say the farmhouse sits like a held breath. On still nights, you can stand at the fence line and hear something inside breathing slow, steady, almost gentle, as if the house itself has been practicing. They don't stay to listen long. If you ever find yourself alone in a house that feels larger after midnight, if the hour is past 2 and the air by your ear changes temperature, if you hear lungs that don't belong to you, learning the rhythm of yours, do not whisper back, do not match it, do not say hello. Turn on the light if you can. Name what is yours. Step outside. even if the dark is wide and the gravel is cold, and you have to leave with your hands empty. Because once it knows you're listening, it will wait for you patient as weather, polite as a knock you're tempted to answer. It will practice your name inside its breath until you forget why the lamp should stay on and the door should stay open and your keys should stay exactly where you left them. It will lean close enough to lift a single hair with its inhale and let it fall with the exhale. And if you answer even with a breath you didn't mean to share, you will feel the room smile. And you won't be alone anymore. Not really. The knock that never stops. The old house on Hemlock Lane had always felt a little off, but I'd always dismissed it as just that old. I had moved from the bustling suburbs of Chicago to a quiet town in New Hampshire, seeking a change of pace, a break from the constant noise and hurried energy of city life. This house, a rustic, two-story structure built a century ago, was the epitome of that quiet. Its clapboard siding was weathered to a soft gray, the porch swing groaned a lullaby in the evening breeze, and the tall, ancient oak tree in the front yard stood as a silent, gnarled guardian. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned a low, mournful tune, and every sudden gust of wind seemed to sigh through the crooked window panes, but those were the comforting, predictable sounds of a home with a long history, or so I told myself. My name is James, and I moved into this house last fall. I'd gotten a great deal on it, a price that seemed almost too good to be true. And its location, tucked away on the edge of the deep woods and far from the main road, was perfect for my quiet, solitary life as a freelance graphic designer. My first few weeks were a dream. I painted the living room a calm shade of forest green, set up my studio in the sunniest room with a panoramic view of the changing autumn leaves, and got into a comfortable routine of working late into the night and sleeping in until a late morning. I felt at peace, a profound, settled peace that I hadn't known in years. Then came the knocking. The first night, I woke up with a start. It sounded like someone was at the front door. I checked the clock on my phone. 3:13 a.m. "Hello?" I called out, my voice raspy with sleep. There was no answer, just the soft whir of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I peered through the peephole, but the motion sensor porch light didn't reveal a soul. It was a cold, clear night, the kind where the moon hangs like a lonely lantern in the inky sky, its light casting long, dancing shadows of the bare branches onto the front lawn. I shrugged it off as a one-time thing, maybe a branch had hit the door in the wind, and went back to bed. The next night, it happened again. The same time, the same rhythm, a rhythmic, insistent knock, knock, knock. My heart began to pound a little harder this time, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. I crept down the hall, my bare feet silent on the worn hardwood floors. The house was cold and still. I peered out the window and saw nothing but the skeletal silhouettes of the maple trees. No car, no footprints in the light frost on the grass, nothing. A chill, unrelated to the November air, snaked up my spine. This wasn't a branch, this was deliberate. This continued for a week. Every night, at precisely 3:13 a.m., the knock would wake me from my deepest sleep. It was never loud enough to rattle the glass or trigger an alarm, but it was just persistent enough to pierce the silence of the night and my peace of mind. I started staying up, waiting for it. The sleep deprivation was beginning to take its toll, my focus at work slipping, my eyelids feeling heavier each day. One night, I sat on the couch right by the front door, a heavy baseball bat clutched in my hand, ready to confront whoever or whatever was out there. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 3:11, 3:12, 3:13, and then silence. My body was coiled with a nervous energy, my muscles tense. I waited and waited, but nothing came. The silence was unnerving, heavier than any noise. Frustrated, feeling utterly foolish and utterly exhausted, I went back to bed, leaving the baseball bat leaning against the wall. The moment my head hit the pillow, the knocking began again, but this time it was different. It was muffled, as if it were coming from inside the walls themselves. It was no longer at the front door. It was everywhere. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. The sound echoed through the house, a phantom drumbeat. Knock, 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 from the living room wall, followed by a faint knock, knock from the kitchen, and then a quick, sharp series of raps from the hallway closet. I felt a cold dread settle over me, a weight that pressed down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. I turned on every single light in the house, but the shadows seemed to cling to the corners of the room, darker and denser than before. I felt a profound sense of not being alone, of being watched, listened to, and, most unsettlingly, of being known. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving a void of silence in its wake that was more terrifying than the noise had ever been. I spent the rest of the night huddled under my blankets, my eyes wide open, staring into the oppressive darkness that the lights couldn't seem to banish. The house felt like a tomb. Over the next few weeks, the knocks became more varied, more personal, more alive. Some nights it would start at the door, then move to the walls of the living room, and then a single soft tap would come from the wall of my bedroom. It was no longer just 3 knocks. It would be a frantic, desperate series of raps, a sound of someone trying to get in or out. The pattern would shift, mimicking a plea, a demand, a desperate plea for something I couldn't understand. I began to talk to myself, to the walls. "What do you want?" I'd whisper into the dark. My voice was a shaky breath in the cavernous silence. I received no answer, only the relentless, mocking beat. I started to research the house's history. The local library had a small archive of Old Town records, dusty and smelling of mildew. I learned that the house was built in the early 1900s by a carpenter named Silas Blackwood. He had a family, a wife named Eleanor, and a young daughter. The daughter, named Lily, was said to have been a sickly child, plagued by a persistent cough and a fever that never broke. The record stated she died in the house during a brutal winter storm in 1918, a blizzard that had cut the town off from the rest of the world for days. The details were sparse, but a few old newspaper clippings hinted at a local tragedy, a family that simply vanished after the storm, leaving the house to be sold to the next owners. It was a common story of the time, and I didn't think much of it at first. It was sad, but it didn't feel connected to the knocks. Not yet. But then, I found a different kind of record. A small, handwritten journal in the local historical society's collection. It was Silas's journal. Its pages were brittle and yellowed with age. He wrote in a shaky, despairing hand about the crushing isolation of the woods, the relentless cold of the New England winter, and his daughter's declining health. He wrote about a specific sound, a rhythmic tapping on her bedroom wall that she would often hear. He dismissed it at first as a mouse, a chipmunk, but as his daughter grew sicker, the tapping became more constant, more frantic. The fear in his words was palpable, seeping through the faded ink. He wrote about trying to find the source of the noise, tearing apart the walls, but finding nothing. The final entry was chilling. The knock, it never stops. It's inside the walls now. She is so scared. I hear her crying for me, but I cannot reach her. It is all around us. The knock, the endless rattle. The journal ended there, its pages torn out, leaving a gaping hole in the narrative. My blood ran cold. The knocking I heard was the same sound he described, the same persistent, deliberate rhythm, the same desperate plea. I wasn't a tenant in a quirky old house. I was an unwilling participant in a story that had been playing out for over a century, a haunting echo of a past trauma. The knocks weren't from the outside, they were from the inside, a desperate echo of a past trauma. One night, the knocking began at the usual time, but this time, it was different. It was a single, gentle tap on my bedroom door. I was standing in the middle of the room, frozen, unable to move. I held my breath, my entire body rigid with fear. Tap, another one, and another. And then, silence. A soft, rustling sound emanated from the doorway like a mouse skittering across the floorboards. Slowly, deliberately, as if a small, fragile hand were reaching for the doorknob, I heard a faint, metallic click, and the door creaked open. Just a crack. A sudden, intense cold swept into the room, so sharp it felt like a physical presence. My breath plumed in the air. The air was thick with a sweet, musty scent of dried flowers and damp earth, a scent that felt impossibly ancient. I couldn't see anything in the sliver of darkness, but I felt a powerful, sorrowful energy. It was a profound sense of longing, a deep loneliness that settled over me like a heavy blanket. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise had ever been, because it felt like the silence of a final, heavy sorrow. The door remained ajar, an invitation. I knew then that it wasn't a malevolent spirit. It was a lost child, still trapped, still tapping, still longing for a connection. She wasn't knocking to scare me. She was knocking to be heard, to be remembered. I sat up, my entire body shaking, and spoke into the cold darkness of my room. My voice was just above a whisper. "I hear you, Lily," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I hear you now. It's okay. You can rest." I don't know why I said those words. They were just what came to my mind. I waited, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. But nothing happened. The cold air dissipated as quickly as it had arrived. The scent of old flowers faded. The silence became just silence. The house no longer felt haunted, it simply felt like a place of history and quiet memory. The house still creaks, the pipes still groan, but the rhythmic, insistent knock at 3:13 a.m. has never returned. I still live here. The house no longer feels off. It feels quiet. And I sometimes wonder if in the dead of night, if I listen closely enough, I can still hear a soft, distant echo of a long-ago rattle, a final tap of a desperate, gentle hand finally finding its peace. Every night at 2:33 a.m., it happens again. All right, folks, settle in. Grab a blanket, maybe a strong cup of coffee, because tonight's story is one of those that worms its way into your thoughts and stays there long after the lights are out. It's a chilling account, one that comes to us from the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri, a place where nothing much usually happens until it does. And when it did, for one man, it happened every single night at a very precise, very unnerving moment. Our protagonist in this unsettling tale is a man named Ethan. Ethan was a software engineer, sharp and analytical, with a mind that preferred logic and code over anything resembling the supernatural. He'd recently purchased an older home, a charming, albeit slightly creaky, two-story house with a grand, sweeping staircase in the entryway. He loved the character of the place, the way the morning light streamed through the antique stained glass window at the top of the stairs, casting colorful patterns on the polished wood floor. He was settling into his new life, his new routine, blissfully unaware of the silent, waiting horror that his new home held. It started subtly, as these things always do. A flicker, a momentary distortion, in the large, ornate mirror that hung in the downstairs hallway, directly opposite the front door. Ethan had inherited the mirror with the house. It was an impressive piece, with a heavy, dark wood frame, intricately carved with what looked like vines and leaves. He rather liked it, thinking it added a touch of old-world charm. One night, about a month after moving in, Ethan woke abruptly. He wasn't sure what had startled him. A sudden silence, perhaps, after a dream. He glanced at his phone beside the bed. 2:33 a.m. He sighed, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. But a strange, almost magnetic pull drew him from his bed. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. Despite the house being warm, he padded downstairs for a glass of water, his bare feet cool on the wooden floors. As he walked past the hallway mirror, he paused. Just for a fraction of a second, he thought he saw something in its reflection. Not his own reflection, but a blurred, shadowy figure standing just behind him. He spun around, heart jumping into his throat. Nothing. Just the empty hallway, the faint moonlight filtering through the front door sidelights. He chuckled nervously, attributing it to sleep deprivation, his mind playing tricks. He was tired, after all. He checked the time again. Still 2:33 a.m. Odd, he thought, a slight shiver running down his spine. The next night, it happened again. The same sudden awakening, the same inexplicable urge to go downstairs, the same intense coldness. And as he passed the mirror, there it was again. A fleeting, almost translucent form standing where the archway to the dining room should be, just out of his direct line of sight in the reflection. This time, he didn't spin around immediately. He stared at the mirror, his breath catching in his throat. The figure was barely discernible, like a ripple in water, a distortion in the glass itself. It was tall, slender, and seemed to be observing him. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. He fumbled for his phone, the screen lighting up to show 2:33 a.m. This was no longer a coincidence. Ethan, the logical engineer, began to feel a deep unease settling in. He tried to rationalize it. Dust on the mirror, playing with the ambient light, the angle of the moonlight. He even cleaned the mirror meticulously, shining it until it gleamed. He strategically placed a small motion-activated camera in the hallway, pointed directly at the mirror, hoping to catch some trick of the light, some mundane explanation. The camera, however, revealed nothing. Each morning, he'd review the footage. Empty hallway, still mirror, nothing out of the ordinary, even at 2:33 a.m. Yet every night, if he was awake, he would feel the cold, that deep, pervasive dread, and he would see it. The shadowy figure, always vague, always fleeting, always at 2:33 a.m. He started trying to stay awake for it. He'd drink coffee, read, work on his laptop, anything to fight off sleep. He wanted to catch it, to prove to himself that it was a trick of his mind, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but even wide awake, the experience was the same. At 2:33 a.m., the air in the hallway would drop several degrees, a sudden, bone-chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the mirror itself. And then the faint, shimmering presence would appear in the reflection, standing just beyond his shoulder, watching him. It never made a sound, never moved aggressively. It simply was. A silent, terrifying observer. Ethan started losing significant sleep. His meticulous work began to suffer. He looked perpetually tired, his eyes bloodshot, a constant tremor in his hands. He was a prisoner in his own home, dreading the approach of 2:33 a.m., yet morbidly compelled to witness what would happen. He knew it sounded insane. He knew anyone he told would think he was cracking up. But the sheer, relentless consistency of it, that was what truly broke him down. Finally, at the end of his rope, he called his older sister, Jessica. Jessica was a no-nonsense real estate agent, grounded and practical, but also fiercely protective of her brother. He explained everything, his voice raspy with exhaustion and fear. He could hear the skepticism in her silence, but also the underlying concern. "Ethan," she said gently, "you need sleep. Maybe you should come stay with me for a few nights." "No," he insisted, his voice cracking. "You have to see it, Jess. You have to." Reluctantly, Jessica agreed to spend a few nights. She arrived with a suitcase and a healthy dose of skepticism. She brought a specialized thermometer to measure temperature fluctuations, a professional-grade EMF detector, and even a small portable night vision camera. She was determined to find a logical explanation. That first night, Jessica opted to sleep on the sofa in the living room, which afforded her a direct, albeit distant, view of the hallway mirror. She wasn't going to get drawn into her brother's ghost stories, but she would certainly gather evidence. She kept the EMF detector on the coffee table beside her, its display glowing faintly in the dark. As the hours crawled by, a stillness settled over the old house. Jessica, despite herself, found her nerves beginning to fray. The house made sounds, old house sounds, but they seemed amplified in the expectant silence. She checked her watch. 2:20 a.m. A knot tightened in her stomach. She heard Ethan stir upstairs, then the faint creak of his floorboards as he made his way down. She watched him, a pale, strained figure, approaching the hallway. Her eyes were fixed on the mirror. 2:30 a.m. Suddenly, the air around her dropped. Not a subtle change, but a distinct, undeniable rush of cold. She shivered, pulling her blanket tighter. The EMF detector on the coffee table gave a faint, almost imperceptible beep, its numbers fluctuating wildly, then settling back down. Then, precisely at 2:33 a.m., Jessica gasped. In the mirror, just behind Ethan's reflection, a faint, wispy shadow began to coalesce. It wasn't a solid figure, not a clear face, but a distinct human-like shape, slightly taller than Ethan, its form almost like smoke, swirling and indistinct. It appeared for only a heartbeat, no more than 2 seconds, before dissipating completely, leaving only Ethan's bewildered reflection staring back. Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind, usually so sharp, struggled to process what she had just witnessed. The cold lingered, raising goosebumps on her arms. She looked at Ethan. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and vindication. "You saw it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Didn't you?" Jessica could only nod, mute with shock. Her EMF detector now read normal, the temperature had returned to its usual level, but the memory of that fleeting, shadowy form in the mirror was burned into her mind. For the next few days, Jessica and Ethan delved into the history of the house. They visited the local library, poring over old property records, newspaper archives, and local history books. They spoke to elderly residents who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. They were looking for any story, any detail that could shed light on the recurring phenomenon. They found it. A tragic, almost forgotten tale. Decades ago, the house had belonged to a young woman named Eleanor Vance, an aspiring actress who had moved to Kansas City with dreams of stardom. She was known for her vibrant personality, her love of old films, and her striking beauty. But her life took a dark turn. She fell ill, a mysterious, rapidly progressing sickness that left her weak and confined to her home. The story went that Eleanor, weakened by her illness, would often spend her evenings sitting in the hallway, looking into that very mirror. She would practice her lines, dream of her future, and perhaps, in her final days, look for some semblance of her former self. Her caretakers reported that she was often found staring into the mirror even in the dead of night. And then, one winter evening, she simply vanished. Her body was never found. The local papers carried a few sensational stories, but with no trace, the case went cold. The official record stated she likely succumbed to her illness and wandered off, or perhaps was taken by someone unknown. But there was a persistent rumor among the older residents, a hushed whisper, that Eleanor had simply faded away. The most chilling detail they uncovered, however, came from an old yellowed diary found in the attic of a neighboring house, written by Eleanor's childhood friend. It spoke of Eleanor's final days, her profound weakness, and her obsession with the mirror. The diary entry for the night of her disappearance was particularly stark. It mentioned a desperate phone call from Eleanor's nurse, reporting that Eleanor had been unusually agitated, staring into the hallway mirror. The nurse had glanced at the clock before heading to Eleanor's room to check on her, noticing the exact time. It read 2:33 a.m. And when the nurse returned to the hallway, Eleanor was gone. Ethan and Jessica stared at the diary entry, a cold dread washing over them. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. The chilling cold, the shadowy figure, the persistent, unwavering time. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, perhaps. It was a residual imprint, a spectral echo of Eleanor's final moments, forever replaying in the polished surface of the mirror. A moment of fear, confusion, and then absolute disappearance. Ethan couldn't live there anymore. The house, once a source of charm, now felt like a mausoleum, a perpetual stage for a silent, terrifying replay. He sold it shortly after, not daring to mention the mirror or the nightly occurrences to the new owners. He packed his bags, leaving the heavy, ornate mirror behind. He couldn't bring himself to touch it, let alone move it. He lives in a modern apartment now, far from old houses and antique mirrors. He sleeps soundly, undisturbed by spectral visitors. But sometimes, when the night is particularly quiet and he wakes for no reason, his eyes instinctively dart to his clock. And for a fleeting moment, a cold prickle runs down his spine as he wonders if, in that house in Kansas City, in that old hallway, at precisely 2:33 a.m., it still happens. The chilling cold, and the faint, shadowy figure in the mirror, watching. So, what do you think happened to Eleanor Vance? Was she truly spirited away at that precise moment? Or is there a more logical, yet equally dark, explanation? Was it merely the tragic memory of a soul trapped in an endless loop? Or something far more sinister, using that mirror as a window? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story sent a shiver down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more strange, dark, and mysterious tales. Good night, everyone. and remember to check your reflections. The baby monitor picked up something else. All right, folks, gather round, because tonight we're diving into a story that's a classic blend of strange, dark, and mysterious. It's a tale that strikes at the heart of every parent's deepest fears. A chilling account that makes you wonder about the thin veil between what we know and what truly lurks beyond. This isn't some urban legend, no. This is a chilling incident that, according to the people who lived through it, genuinely unfolded in a quiet, seemingly idyllic suburban town called Fairhaven, Massachusetts. So, dim the lights, silence your phones, and prepare to question what else is listening in on your loved ones. Our story centers around a young couple, Liam and Chloe. They were first-time parents, utterly devoted to their beautiful baby girl, Maya. Their lives, like most new parents, revolved around feedings, diaper changes, and snatching a few precious hours of sleep whenever possible. They had just moved into a charming, slightly older home, a 2-story colonial with a welcoming porch, and a backyard perfect for future playdates. The nursery, a bright, airy room at the back of the house, had been lovingly decorated with soft pastels and whimsical animal motifs. It was a haven, a sanctuary for their precious new arrival. To ensure their peace of mind, they had invested in a top-of-the-line baby monitor, a digital model with a crystal-clear display and two-way audio, promising advanced security and zero interference. It sat on Chloe's bedside table, a silent sentinel, always on, always connected to Maya's room. Initially, it was perfect. They'd hear Maya's soft coos, her sleepy sighs, the occasional cry that would send them rushing to her side. The monitor was a source of comfort, a technological extension of their parental instincts. Then, things started to get odd. It began with subtle static, faint, almost imperceptible bursts of white noise that would occasionally punctuate Maya's peaceful slumber. Liam, ever the pragmatist, chalked it up to interference. Probably just a neighbor's Wi-Fi, he'd say, shrugging it off. Chloe, a little more sensitive, felt a slight prickle of unease, but pushed it away. It was an old house, after all. These things happen. But the static became more frequent, more insistent. It wasn't just random crackling anymore. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when Maya was clearly sound asleep, the static would morph. It would take on a strange, rhythmic quality, almost like a distant breath. A slow, drawn-out inhale, then an exhale. Liam would snatch the monitor, fiddling with the antenna, pressing buttons, trying to clear the signal. The breathing would vanish, only to return moments later, sometimes even clearer. One Tuesday night, around 1:45 a.m., Chloe woke to a distinct sound coming from the monitor. It wasn't static, it was a low, guttural murmur, deep and raspy. Not Maya's cries, not a baby sound at all. She nudged Liam awake, her heart pounding. They both listened, wide-eyed in the dark bedroom. The murmuring continued for a few seconds, then abruptly cut off, replaced by the familiar soft hum of the monitor. "What was that?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Liam, still half asleep, frowned. "Sounded like a truck outside? Or maybe the house settling?" He tried to sound confident, but a sliver of doubt had begun to creep into his rational mind. The sound had been too close, too internal. They checked on Maya. She was perfectly fine, sleeping soundly in her crib, a tiny fist tucked under her chin. The nursery was quiet, peaceful, too quiet. They spent a nervous few minutes listening at her door, then returned to bed, the mystery unresolved, a new layer of unease added to their already sleep-deprived lives. The incidents continued. The peculiar static, the phantom breathing, the guttural murmuring. They replaced the monitor, buying an even newer, more expensive model, convinced it was a technical fault. But the new monitor, with its supposedly unhackable digital signal, picked up the exact same things. The same strange sounds, the same unsettling presence that seemed to fill Maya's room when no one was there. The most unnerving occurrences always happened in the deep hours of the night. Often, around 2:30 a.m., Liam would find himself jolted awake by an almost physical coldness in their bedroom, a sensation that would last only a few minutes, precisely coinciding with the strange activity on the monitor. He'd glance at the time, always in that window, just after 2, 2:30, sometimes extending to 2:40. He never understood why that specific time felt so significant. Then came the voices. It was a Friday night nearing 2:33 a.m. Liam and Chloe were both awake, lying in bed, tense and expectant. They were exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. The monitor crackled, then the rhythmic breathing started, louder than ever, and then, beneath the breathing, they heard it. A whisper. Faint, almost unintelligible, but clearly words. "What? What is that?" Chloe breathed, clutching Liam's arm. They strained to listen, their ears aching in the dark. The voice, a low, raspy whisper, seemed to be speaking directly into the microphone. It was distorted, unclear, but they both distinctly heard two words, two terrifying words that made their blood run cold. "Our baby." Liam jumped out of bed, adrenaline surging through him. Chloe let out a small whimper, her hand clamped over her mouth. They raced to Maya's room, Liam fumbling with the doorknob. The door swung open. The nursery was dark, save for the faint glow of a nightlight. Maya was in her crib, still perfectly asleep, completely undisturbed. The room was empty. No intruder, no open window, no sign of anything amiss. Liam swept the room with his eyes, checking under the crib, behind the rocking chair, inside the closet. Nothing. But the monitor, sitting silently on the dresser, was still on. And from it, a faint, chilling whisper echoed. Not our baby this time. Something new. Something worse. It was a soft, almost mournful hum. A lullaby. A very old, very strange lullaby, sung by that same raspy voice. Liam snatched the monitor, turning it off with a furious click. The silence that followed was deafening, terrifying. Chloe picked up Maya, holding her close, tears streaming down her face. They stayed in their bed for the rest of the night, Maya nestled between them, the monitor lying face down on the dresser, a silent, menacing box. The next day, they called everyone. An electrician, a ghost hunter, much to Liam's logical reluctance, even a private investigator to look into the house's history. The electrician found nothing wrong with the wiring. The ghost hunter, a quirky but sincere woman named Martha, picked up some minor EMF fluctuations in the nursery, but nothing conclusive. She suggested the residual energy of a past presence, a loop playing out. The private investigator, however, found something more concrete. Decades ago, the house had been home to a family, the Millers. They had a baby girl, born in that very room. Tragically, the baby had died unexpectedly in her sleep, a sudden, unexplained loss that devastated the family. The parents, driven mad by grief, had reportedly taken turns sitting in the nursery every night, staring at the empty crib, whispering to their lost child, singing lullabies. They eventually sold the house, unable to bear the memories, and disappeared from the public record. Liam and Chloe read the old newspaper clippings, their hands shaking. The baby, a girl named Evelyn. The year, a long time ago. The details were sparse, but the emotional weight was crushing. They learned that the Millers had been particularly devoted, obsessive even, in their grief. They'd even had an early, rudimentary baby monitor, a clunky device that used radio waves, though it was long gone. The most chilling detail emerged from a local historical society's archives. A letter written by a neighbor to a relative, expressing concern for the Millers. In it, the neighbor mentioned hearing the saddest, most broken lullabies echoing from the Miller house in the dead of night, usually just after 2:30. The phrase, "our baby." The whispers, the lullaby. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, gut-wrenching certainty. The baby monitor wasn't picking up interference. It was picking up the echoes of profound grief, the lingering presence of parents who never left their child's side, even in death. It was capturing the sounds of a tragedy, replaying itself through time, using the baby monitor as its conduit. Liam and Chloe moved out that week. They couldn't stay. They couldn't bring themselves to put Maya back in that room, knowing what else might be listening. They sold the house at a loss, never mentioning a word about the monitor or the voices. They just wanted to escape. They live in a new apartment now, a modern building with no history, no echoing grief. They have a new baby monitor, one they check constantly, but it only ever picks up Maya's sweet, innocent sounds. But sometimes, when Liam wakes in the middle of the night, a cold sweat on his brow, he'll glance at the clock. And if it's anywhere near 2:33 a.m., he can almost hear it. Not the monitor, but the faint, ethereal whisper just at the edge of his hearing. A mournful lullaby sung by a heartbroken voice. And he wonders if the Millers, wherever they may be, are still whispering to their baby. And if, in that quiet house in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, the baby monitor still picks up something else. So, what do you think? Was it truly the lingering echoes of lost parents forever bound to their child? Or was it something more? Something that uses grief as a doorway to our world? Leave your theories in the comments below, and if this story made you check your baby monitor twice, hit that like button and subscribe for more strange, dark, and mysterious tales. Good night, everyone, and sweet dreams.
In April of 1981, tucked deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California, there was a place called Keddie. It wasn't really a town in the traditional sense, more like a collection of cabins scattered along the forest, old railway tracks running through like veins. People came to Keddie for cheap rent, peace, or just to disappear for a while. One of those people was a woman named Glenna Sue Sharp. She'd moved into cabin 28 with her 5 kids the previous fall, trying to rebuild her life after leaving her abusive husband. By all accounts, she was kind, protective, and doing everything she could with what little she had. The cabin itself wasn't special, small, a little worn down, with creaky floorboards and thin walls, but to Sue's kids, it was home. The Sharps quickly became known to neighbors. Teenagers would come by to hang out with the older Sharp kids. Sue didn't have much, but she always welcomed people in. That spring night, April 11th, the air was cool, and the forest outside was still, like the whole place was holding its breath. Sue was home with her 2 youngest sons, Rick and Greg, and their friend Justin, who was staying the night. Her daughter Tina, 12, had been out earlier with neighbors but was home by bedtime. Upstairs, Sue's teenage daughter Sheila was spending the night at the Seabolt family's house next door, just across a small dirt path. And in the living room were Sue's oldest son, John, who was 15, and his friend Dana Wingate, 17. They'd spent the day hitchhiking, which back then wasn't all that unusual. They'd been picked up by someone earlier that day, dropped off in Quincy, and eventually made their way back to Keddie that evening. Around 10 p.m., neighbors saw the 2 boys heading toward cabin 28. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. Sometime after midnight, while the forest slept, something terrible began inside cabin 28. No one heard cars pulling up. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever came inside that night either knew the Sharps or was invited in. What happened over the next few hours was so brutal, so chaotic, that even seasoned investigators would struggle to make sense of it. The next morning, around 7 a.m., Sheila walked home from the Seabolt's cabin. She opened the front door, expecting to hear her brothers playing or her mom making breakfast. Instead, what she saw froze her in place. The living room was silent. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then she saw them, John, Dana, and Sue. They were lying on the floor, bound with electrical cord and medical tape. There was blood everywhere on the floor, the furniture, splattered on the walls. It looked like a storm had torn through the small cabin. Sheila turned and screamed for the neighbors. The Seabolts rushed over, and one of the fathers ran inside. What they didn't realize at first was that 3 younger boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were still alive, sleeping unharmed in a back bedroom. The killers had spared them, or somehow hadn't even gone in there. But Tina, the 12-year-old, was gone. Deputies arrived quickly, and soon the cabin was swarming with law enforcement. What they found shocked even the most experienced officers. The bindings on the victims were improvised electrical cords, medical tape, even parts of extension cords tied around their wrists and ankles. Sue had been beaten and stabbed repeatedly. A gag had been shoved in her mouth. John had been attacked with such force that one investigator later described it as overkill. Dana had likely been strangled in addition to being beaten. The weapons, a hammer, a knife, and possibly another sharp object, had either been brought by the killers or grabbed from the Sharps' kitchen. One knife was found bent almost at a right angle, a sign of how vicious the attacks were. Detectives were baffled by the crime scene. There was no forced entry. Nothing valuable seemed to be missing. Whoever did this stayed for a while, comfortable enough to methodically bind their victims and commit a prolonged attack without worrying about being caught. Blood spatter patterns suggested the killers moved freely through the cabin, controlling their victims. It wasn't quick. It wasn't random. It was rage. Meanwhile, a search for Tina began immediately. Helicopters flew over the dense forest. Volunteers combed through the trees and along the railway tracks. But there was no trace. It was like she had vanished into the woods. The investigation turned quickly toward people who knew the Sharps. One man in particular stood out. Martin Smart, a neighbor who lived just 2 cabins away. He was a Vietnam veteran. With a short temper, his wife Marilyn was friends with Sue, and their kids played together often. That night, Martin claimed he and a friend named Beau Boubet, a drifter and ex-convict, had spent the evening at a local bar before coming home and going to sleep. But something about Martin's story didn't sit right with investigators or with his own wife. Marilyn later said that on the night of the murders, Martin had been acting strangely. The next day, he reportedly burned some clothing in the wood stove. When asked why, he claimed they were just old clothes. Beau, his house guest, was a convicted bank robber and had ties to organized crime in Chicago. He'd only been in Keddie for a short time, but he'd already inserted himself into local gossip circles. During his interview, Martin made a statement that chilled detectives. He said, "I've never killed anyone before." It wasn't in response to a question about guilt. It just slipped out. Later, he also admitted to being in therapy and claimed he'd told his counselor something incriminating. According to reports, that counselor told the Department of Justice that Martin confessed to the killings. But that statement was never followed up properly. For reasons that remain murky, bureaucratic failures, incompetence, or something darker, the case went cold. Weeks turned into months. The cabin was eventually torn down. The Sharp family was shattered. But 3 years later, in 1984, a small human skull was found near a waterfall, roughly 50 miles away from Keddie. When investigators searched the area more thoroughly, they found more bones, some clothing, and a piece of tape. Dental records confirmed it was Tina Sharp. Her remains had been scattered in the woods. This discovery reignited interest in the case. But leads still dried up. People in Keddie whispered that Martin and Beau were involved. Some said there were more people that night. Others believed the killers had inside knowledge of the Sharp family's routines. Marilyn eventually divorced Martin, and years later, she claimed she believed he was involved. But Martin died in 2000, Beau in 1988, taking whatever they knew with them. Decades passed, but the Keddie cabin murders haunted Plumas County like a ghost that refused to leave. Over the years, new sheriffs came and went. Boxes of evidence were stored away. Some misplaced, others collecting dust in basements. But locals never forgot. Those who had been kids in 1981 grew up telling stories about Cabin 28, the screams that some claimed they heard that night, the shadowy figures seen near the railway tracks, the feeling that someone out there knew exactly what happened and was still walking free. In 2013, the case finally found new momentum. Sheriff Greg Hagwood, who had been a teenager living in Keddie at the time of the murders, decided to take another look. He reopened the investigation and brought in Special Investigator Mike Gamberg, a man with deep roots in the community and a reputation for not letting things slide. When Gamberg started digging through old evidence, what he found was infuriating. First, he discovered that Martin Smart's therapist had indeed passed along a confession to the Department of Justice in 1981. Martin had allegedly admitted to killing Sue and Tina because Sue had been trying to stop his marriage from falling apart. But that lead had been ignored. Then Gamberg found something else, a recording, taken not long after the murders, of a man calling the sheriff's office and saying, "I know who killed the Sharp family. It was Tina Sharp that was taken." This call had never been properly followed up either. It had sat in an evidence box for over 30 years, and then there was the hammer. In 2016, a metal detector sweep near the old Keddie site uncovered a hammer buried in the ground, matching the description of a missing hammer from Martin Smart's house back in 1981. Investigators believed this could be one of the murder weapons. It had been lying there in the dirt, steps away from where the crime took place, for decades. As Gamberg and Hagwood pieced the puzzle together, the picture became clearer. Martin Smart had motive. He was angry with Sue for meddling in his marriage. He had opportunity. He lived next door. And he had the means. He owned a hammer like the one found and had a violent streak. Beau Boubede, with his criminal background and connections, could have been the accomplice. Some investigators now believe there may have been a third person involved, possibly someone who knew the Sharp kids well enough to walk in without suspicion. One of the most chilling details came from Justin, the friend of Rick and Greg who had been sleeping in the boys' room that night. Under hypnosis, a controversial practice, even then he described seeing two men in the living room. One had long hair, the other short. They were arguing with Sue. He remembered Tina coming into the room and one of the men grabbing her. Some details were inconsistent, but it gave investigators at least a glimpse into what may have happened. The killers entered, confronted Sue, tied everyone up, and during the chaos, Tina walked in. She may have been taken because she saw too much. Or worse. What's unsettling is that this wasn't a random break-in. It was personal. The level of violence suggested rage, especially towards Sue. And yet, the killers left the three younger boys alive in the next room. Why? Were they too young to identify the attackers? Did the killers simply not care about them? Or did the killers know exactly who was in that room and deliberately spare them? To this day, no one has ever been charged. Martin Smart died before he could be properly questioned again. Beau Boubede died years earlier. Many of the original investigators are gone. But the evidence collected by Gamberg and Hagwood paints a damning picture. They've publicly stated they believe Martin and Beau were responsible, and that the case is solvable. DNA testing on old evidence has been ongoing, but so far, nothing conclusive has been announced. The cabin itself is gone. It was demolished in 2004 after decades of becoming a macabre pilgrimage site for true crime fans and locals who couldn't shake the feeling that something evil had once lingered there. All that's left is the clearing where Cabin 28 once stood, surrounded by trees that have grown thicker since 1981, as if nature itself is trying to cover the scars. But for the surviving Sharp children, and for those who grew up in Keddie, the story is far from over. The image of Sheila opening that door on a quiet April morning to find her family slaughtered is burned into their memories. The unanswered questions linger. Why was Tina taken? How many people were actually involved? And how close did the killers live to their victims? Some locals believe justice will never come. Others are convinced the truth is still buried somewhere, maybe in an overlooked piece of evidence, maybe in someone's guilty conscience. Investigators like Gamberg remain determined. He once said, "This case is solvable. We know who did it. We just have to prove it." In the end, the Keddie Cabin murders remain one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. A family trying to start over in a quiet mountain town became the target of unimaginable violence. And 40 years later, the echo of that night still drifts through the trees of Keddie, unanswered, waiting for someone to finally tell the full story. After the investigation, what the local sheriff's office expected to be a quick wrap-up of a weird knocking complaint turned into one of the most extensive rural manhunts the state had seen in years. The night deputies responded to the isolated cabin, tucked deep inside the old logging trails near Red Hollow. They thought they were dealing with a trespasser, maybe some teenagers messing around. But by sunrise, the property had been transformed into a sealed-off crime scene, with search teams combing through every inch of mud and leaf litter. The cabin belonged to 39-year-old Daniel Dan Mercer, a freelance carpenter who had moved to the area 2 years earlier from Portland. His neighbors, what few there were, described him as polite but distant, a man who spent long stretches alone in the woods with his dog, Bear. On the night in question, Dan called 911 shortly after 1 a.m. to report persistent, rhythmic knocking on his front door. He said it had started around midnight. Always 3 knocks at a time, every 15 minutes. Deputies arrived, swept the perimeter, found nothing, and left. But not 20 minutes after they drove off, Dan called again, this time whispering that he could hear the knocking on his back wall. When the deputies returned for the second time, Dan was gone. Inside, nothing looked ransacked. His phone was on the kitchen counter. His wallet and truck keys sat in a bowl by the door. Bear was locked in the bedroom, unharmed but whining. The only sign of disturbance was a set of muddy boot prints leading from the back door into the forest. They matched Dan's boots, and then, abruptly, they stopped after 30 or so feet, as if he had been lifted off the ground. For the first 48 hours, the investigation followed the standard missing person protocol. Search and rescue volunteers scoured the surrounding woods with dogs, drones, and thermal imaging. The terrain was rugged but not endless. There were clear boundaries marked by an old fence line to the north and a creek to the south. Yet they found no trace of him. No dropped flashlight, no torn clothing, not even a broken branch suggesting a struggle. It was as if Dan Mercer had stepped outside and evaporated into the cold night air. The turning point came on day 5. A state forensic team ran luminol inside the cabin as part of a routine sweep. Under the pale blue glow, faint arcs of blood spray became visible on the kitchen wall opposite the back door. They were small, almost microscopic, but they were there. Subsequent testing confirmed the blood matched Dan's DNA. The pattern was consistent with high-velocity impact spatter, the kind produced when a blunt object strikes flesh. Whoever had been inside that cabin after the deputies left had hit Dan hard enough to spray blood droplets and then vanished with him. Detective Laura Keene, a veteran homicide investigator, was assigned to lead the case. She started by reconstructing Dan's final days. His bank records showed no suspicious activity. His social media was sparse, mostly woodworking photos and dog pictures. But his cell phone revealed a curious pattern. In the 3 weeks before his disappearance, Dan had made several calls to an unlisted number belonging to a prepaid burner phone. The calls were always short, less than 30 seconds. Whoever was on the other end never called back. Laura subpoenaed cell tower data for the burner number and traced its pings to various points along Highway 217, a desolate stretch used mainly by truckers and hunters. More intriguingly, 2 pings placed the burner less than a mile from Dan's cabin on the night of the disappearance. That meant whoever owned that phone had been in the area when the knocking began. Meanwhile, forensic techs processed the muddy boot prints. The pattern was distinctive. Dan's boots had a custom sole he'd cut himself with a utility knife to improve grip. But mixed faintly around the edges of the prints were partial impressions from a second pair of boots. The tread suggested military or tactical footwear. It wasn't conclusive, but it hinted that someone else had been there with him that night. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted due to the eerie knocking behavior. Their working theory, the perpetrator had been deliberately harassing Dan, using psychological pressure to lure him outside. The regular intervals of knocking suggested patience and planning. It wasn't a random break-in. It was a staged ritual meant to terrify and manipulate. 3 weeks into the investigation, a hunter reported finding something downstream along the creek south of Dan's property. Wedged beneath a fallen log was a duffel bag wrapped in black plastic. Inside were a blood-stained hammer, a flashlight, and a burner phone the same number Dan had called. The hammer's blood matched Dan's DNA, but the most chilling detail was the phone. Its call log showed multiple outgoing calls to Dan's number at 11:45 p.m., 12 a.m., and 12:15 a.m. Precisely matching the knocking intervals Dan had reported to 911. Laura's team traced the duffel bag's origin to a military surplus store 2 counties away. The hammer had been purchased at a local hardware store, cash only, no security cameras. But the burner phone was bought at a convenience store off Highway 217. Reviewing the grainy CCTV footage, investigators spotted a man wearing a camo jacket and a black ball cap paying for the phone. His face was partially obscured by the brim, but his height, build, and posture were distinctive. He appeared confident, purposeful, not a jittery opportunist. The break came unexpectedly. A state trooper pulled over a pickup truck for a broken taillight about 40 miles from Red Hollow. In the passenger seat sat a man matching the description from the CCTV footage. His name was Thomas Reddick, a 35-year-old former Army mechanic with a history of minor assaults and trespassing. In the truck's bed, troopers found tactical boots with a tread similar to the partial prints near Dan's cabin. Thomas denied knowing Dan Mercer. He claimed he'd been camping alone the night of the disappearance. But phone records told a different story. His personal cell was off that night, but the burner phone signal pinged near his residence the day after Dan vanished. And when detectives searched his property, they found a collection of surveillance photos hidden in a locked footlocker. The photos showed Dan's cabin, taken from various angles over weeks, as if Thomas had been staking the place out. Under interrogation, Thomas remained calm. When Laura showed him the hammer, the photos, and the burner phone, he smiled faintly and said, "You can't prove where I was." His alibi for that night camping near Devil's Ridge fell apart when no one at the campsite remembered seeing him. For months, prosecutors built a circumstantial case. There was no body, no eyewitness, no confession. But the evidence painted a chilling picture. Thomas had surveilled Dan, taunted him with knocks, lured him outside, attacked him, and disposed of the body. His motive remained unclear. He and Dan had no known connection. But then, during a deeper financial audit, investigators discovered that Thomas had filed a fraudulent quitclaim deed attempting to claim Dan's cabin property just 2 days after Dan went missing. It appeared Thomas had targeted Dan for his remote land, isolated, valuable timber acreage worth over $300,000. He had planned to make Dan disappear, forge ownership documents, and quietly sell the land. At trial, Thomas maintained his innocence. The defense argued the evidence was purely circumstantial, that someone else could have planted the duffel bag and taken the photos. But the prosecution countered with the precision of the knocking, the surveillance, the forged deed, and the matching boot prints. In the absence of a body, the jury deliberated for 6 days before convicting Thomas Reddick of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to life without parole. Years later, hikers stumbled upon a shallow grave half a mile east of the cabin in a dense thicket missed by the original search. Inside were Dan Mercer's remains. The forensic team determined he had been struck once in the back of the head, dragged, and buried hastily. The hammer matched the wound perfectly. The cabin knocking case, as the media dubbed it, became infamous not because of supernatural mystery, but because of its chilling patience and planning. Thomas had weaponized fear, using something as simple as rhythmic knocks in the night to control his victim's behavior. He didn't need to break the door down. He just needed Dan to step outside. Detective Laura Keene often said it was the quiet detail, the 3 soft knocks every 15 minutes, that stuck with her. It was calculated psychological warfare. And for months, it had almost fooled everyone into thinking Dan had simply vanished into the woods. In reality, the monster had been standing just beyond the tree line, waiting for him to open the door. Halloween has always been about masks and costumes, about becoming someone or something else for just one night. But in the fall of 1989, in the quiet suburb of Ashford Heights, Connecticut, one man took that concept to a place so dark and twisted that it would forever change how that community celebrated the holiday. His name was Martin Dreyfus, and while the world knew him as a friendly middle school science teacher who loved Halloween more than anyone else in town, behind the elaborate decorations and generous candy bowls was a collector of the most horrifying kind. This is the story of the man the FBI would later call the Halloween collector, and the night his carefully constructed world finally came crashing down. Martin Dreyfus was 43 years old in 1989, a lifelong bachelor who had taught 8th grade science at Ashford Middle School for nearly 15 years. His students loved him. He was the teacher who made learning fun, who brought in real animal skulls and let the kids touch them, who could make even the most boring lesson about photosynthesis seem fascinating. But it was his love of Halloween that made him truly legendary in Ashford Heights. Every year without fail, Martin would transform his modest 2-story colonial home into the neighborhood's premier Halloween destination. We're talking about a month-long project that began the first week of October. He would erect an elaborate graveyard in his front yard, complete with fog machines and motion-activated tombstones. He built a tunnel of terror through his garage, where brave trick-or-treaters could walk through curtains of fake spiderwebs, while animatronic zombies lurched at them from the shadows. And his decorations weren't cheap store-bought plastic. Martin was an artist. He hand-sculpted his own props, creating incredibly lifelike corpses and monsters that were so realistic that parents would sometimes complain they were too scary for young children. But Martin would just laugh in that good-natured way of his and say that Halloween was supposed to be scary. On Halloween night, he would dress in an elaborate costume, something different every year. One year, he was a plague doctor with an authentic-looking leather mask. Another year, he was a convincing werewolf with professional-grade prosthetics. He would stand on his porch from 5 in the evening until well past 10 at night, personally greeting every single trick-or-treater, acting out his character, and handing out full-sized candy bars. The kids would line up down the block just to visit Mr. Dreyfus's house. Parents considered it a rite of passage. But what none of them knew, what no one could have possibly known, was that Martin's obsession with Halloween, with masks and costumes and transformation, had a much darker purpose. He wasn't just celebrating the holiday. He was hunting. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came on the morning of November 1st, 1989. A 13-year-old girl named Rebecca Hartley had gone trick-or-treating the night before with a group of her friends. They had visited dozens of houses, including Mr. Dreyfus's elaborate haunted setup. Rebecca had come home around 9:30 that night, showed her parents her haul of candy, and gone to bed. But when her mother went to wake her for school the next morning, Rebecca's bed was empty. The window to her second-floor bedroom was open, and the screen had been carefully removed from the outside and placed on the floor. Rebecca was gone. The Ashford Heights police launched an immediate investigation. They quickly discovered something that made their blood run cold. Rebecca wasn't the first. When they started digging through old missing persons reports from surrounding towns, they found a pattern. Over the past 7 years, 6 children had vanished on Halloween night or in the early morning hours of November 1st. All of them were between the ages of 12 and 14. All of them had been trick-or-treating in their respective neighborhoods. And in every single case, they had disappeared from their bedrooms through a second-story window that had been opened from the outside. The realization was horrifying. Someone had been using Halloween as cover, watching children as they trick-or-treated, following them home, and then returning in the dead of night to take them. A serial kidnapper had been operating across Connecticut for 7 years, and no one had connected the dots until now. The FBI was called in immediately. Special Agent Sarah Chen led the task force. She was a specialist in child abduction cases, and she knew they were in a race against time. Statistically, if Rebecca was still alive, they had maybe 72 hours to find her before her chances of survival dropped to almost zero. The investigation was massive and frantic. Every registered sex offender in a 50-mile